The emergency lights flashed throughout the hallways of Space Station Gamma 7, bathing its pristine white corridors in an ominous red glow. The heavy buzz of warning signals reverberated off the metal walls, and the station's AI voice repeated the same message, its mechanical tones echoing through the halls. All non-essential personnel, please return to your quarters. This is not a drill. Dr. James Walker, the station's lead xenobiologist, had seen his share of strange and unsettling things over the 5 years he had spent working at Gamma 7, but nothing had ever provoked this level of chaos. 3 different alien species had sent emergency alerts within the past hour, each one urging the station to destroy the creature immediately. And now James was running through the station's corridors, his boots making heavy, urgent sounds against the metal floor, heading toward the containment area, where something truly horrifying awaited. As he approached, he could feel the tension in the air, the unease palpable even before he reached the lab. Tom, his young assistant, ran up behind him, holding a tablet. His face was a mixture of concern and disbelief. Dr. Walker, we've managed to contain it in Lab 4, but sir, you should know it killed 2 security robots before they could even get it into the containment cell. James took the tablet from Tom, scanning the initial scans. The creature had been found drifting in an escape pod that had somehow made its way to the station. The pod's design was unlike anything in the station's database, completely unfamiliar to the xenobiologists and researchers. As they reached the observation room, James saw a small crowd gathered, peering through the reinforced window. His gaze moved immediately to the containment cell. Inside was the most bizarre, unsettling creature he had ever seen. It was nearly 7 feet tall, with sleek muscles rippling beneath skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The creature's form reminded James of an Earth-big cat, with powerful limbs and a predatory posture. But unlike anything from Earth, its skin seemed to shift and ripple, as if it were made of living shadows. That's a shadow stalker, Captain Reed, the station's security chief, said in a low voice. His face was pale, his expression tight with fear. We thought they were just stories from deep space traders. No one's ever captured one alive before. It's the deadliest predator in known space. Centurions lost 3 colony ships to one of these things last year. Another officer added, her voice tinged with awe and terror. James stepped closer to the reinforced glass, studying the creature. It was unnerving, yes, but there was something more to it. The shadow stalker wasn't behaving like the mindless killer it was described as in stories. It sat calmly in the center of its cell, its head turning slowly as it tracked the movements of the people in the observation room. Its eyes glowed with a deep, unsettling purple hue, which seemed to suggest a level of intelligence far beyond a mere predator's. Has anyone tried communicating with it? James asked, his voice calm but filled with curiosity. He was well aware of the danger, but something about the creature's behavior didn't align with what he had read in all the reports. The security team exchanged glances, their faces a mix of disbelief and concern. Captain Reed's voice was filled with skepticism and fear. Communicate, Doctor? The only thing it communicates is death. We've already received orders from Central Command. Once the containment field reaches full power, we're supposed to flood the chamber with plasma. James watched the creature tilt its head slightly as if it had heard their conversation. Look at its posture, he said, his voice growing more insistent. It's not displaying aggressive behavior. No pacing, no test of the barriers, no threat display. This is not typical predator behavior. Not when cornered. Captain Reed scoffed. With all due respect, Doctor, we've got warnings from 3 different advanced species. The Arterians even threatened to cut off trade relations if we don't destroy it immediately. James' mind was racing. This creature wasn't behaving as expected. It wasn't reacting like the predatory killing machine everyone thought it was. Instead, it seemed more controlled, more composed than it should be. Something about this wasn't adding up. He looked back at the creature, who seemed to be watching him with curiosity, its glowing purple eyes locking onto his. We might be making a mistake, James said. His voice steady but with an urgency that the others could not ignore. Give me 1 hour with it. I think this might be more than just a predator. I think we might be dealing with an intelligent species. The room went silent. For a moment, no one spoke, and the tension thickened. Captain Reed stared at him in disbelief, his jaw tightening. "Absolutely not," Reed said, his tone firm. "It's too dangerous. We have it contained. I'll stay in the observation room. If you're wrong, we haven't lost anything. But if I'm right..." His voice trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. "Captain," James said, keeping his voice calm but insistent, "we might be about to make first contact with a new intelligent species." Reed looked from the creature to James, then back to the creature. Finally, with an exhale, he nodded. 30 minutes, he said. "Not a second more. And at the first sign of trouble, we're activating the plasma." The security team filed out, and James took a seat near the observation window, closer to the containment cell. The shadow stalker's glowing eyes remained fixed on him with an intensity that would have made most people run in fear. But to James, it was different. He saw something else in those eyes: curiosity. The creature seemed as interested in him as he was in it. "Hello?" James said softly, pressing his hand against the glass where the creature's limb was still pressed, like it was trying to make contact. "I think you and I have a lot to talk about." Behind him, Tom nervously checked his watch. 30 minutes to prove that the galaxy's most feared predator is more than it seems, he murmured under his breath. James couldn't shake the feeling that these next 30 minutes would be the most important of his life. He had a sense that something big was unfolding, something that could change everything. The emergency lights flickered throughout the station, bathing the white corridors of Space Station Gamma 7 in a red glow. The warning signals echoed ominously, and the station's AI repeated its message over the loudspeakers. "All non-essential personnel, please return to your quarters. This is not a drill. Dr. James Walker, the station's lead xenobiologist, was deep in thought as he rushed down the halls toward the containment area. The tension in the air was thick, and the urgency of the situation had set everyone on edge. 3 alien species had sent emergency warnings about the creature that had arrived at the station just hours earlier. According to these messages, the creature needed to be destroyed immediately, but James wasn't convinced. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him. As he entered his office, Tom, his young assistant, followed closely behind. "Dr. Walker," Tom said, his voice tinged with both fear and disbelief, "have you seen the latest data? Captain Reed is already preparing for the execution order. The creature, it's dangerous. It's killed hundreds of people, according to the Centurions, the Arterians." James interrupted, his tone calm but insistent. "According to whom?" he asked, pointing at his data screens. "The Arterians? The Centurions? Has anyone actually verified these stories? Because everything I've seen so far suggests we're dealing with something entirely different here. A highly intelligent being." He stood up from his desk, walking toward the door with purpose. "The station council is meeting in 1 hour," Tom said, glancing nervously at the clock. "They're going to order the termination, and this time, there won't be any delays." James looked back at his assistant, determination in his eyes. "I'm going to prove I'm right. Come with me." Without waiting for a response, he walked out the door, heading toward the containment area. As they arrived at the observation room, James did something that made Tom gasp. He lowered the security barrier between the observation room and the main containment cell. Tom's eyes widened in shock. "Are you crazy?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's against every safety protocol. We could all be dead in seconds." "Just watch," James said, his voice steady. Through the glass, they watched as the shadow stalker, what James had begun to call the creature, moved toward the now open doorway. Its dark form seemed to ripple in the light, but instead of attacking, it did something unexpected. It sat down calmly and raised one of its limbs. James recognized the gesture instantly. It was a greeting. He pulled a small device from his pocket, a holographic projector he had been working on in secret. Placing it on the floor, he activated it. A series of 3-dimensional shapes appeared in the air between them. The Shadow Stalker Knight, as James had decided to call it, watched the shapes intently, its glowing purple eyes following their movement. Then, to James' amazement, The creature raised its limb again and manipulated the shapes, completing a complex puzzle James had programmed. Amazing, Tom whispered, his fear momentarily forgotten in the face of such an unprecedented event. James, feeling a rush of excitement, pulled out his tablet and typed a message. It displayed on the screen in large letters. Asterisk, they want to kill you. Why do they fear you? Asterisk. Knight stared at the message for a long moment. Then, to Tom's shock, it moved to the computer panel in its cell and began typing with its long, graceful fingers. The message that appeared on James's tablet sent a chill down his spine. Asterisk, because they attacked us first. We defended ourselves. They called us monsters. It's easier to kill monsters than admit a mistake. Asterisk. Tom stumbled backward in disbelief. It can write? It knows English, he whispered. It's been learning, James said, his voice tinged with awe. From watching us. From the computer systems it had access to in its cell. I suspected it had this level of intelligence days ago. But I needed to be sure before showing anyone. More text appeared on the tablet. Others of my kind still live. Hiding, surviving, waiting for someone who will listen. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The council members were arriving earlier than expected. James quickly reactivated the security barrier and hid the projector, feeling the pressure rise. He had to act fast, but he needed more time. Dr. Walker. Captain Reed's voice boomed as he entered the observation room, followed by several council members. Step away from the containment cell immediately. James stood his ground, unfazed. Council members, before you make your decision, there's something you need to see. He held up his tablet, displaying the messages from Knight. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, but James pressed on. This is real. I need one more day. Let me show you all what I've discovered. This is absurd, one of the council members said, shaking his head. This could be a trick, a manipulation. Then let me prove it, James replied, his voice steady and confident. Give me one more day. If I'm wrong, I'll activate the plasma controls myself. The room fell silent as the council members debated. Some were skeptical, others uncertain, but finally the head of the council spoke. You have until this time tomorrow, Doctor, he said. After that, we proceed with the termination. And if anything goes wrong, it's on your head. James nodded, his eyes meeting Knight's through the thick glass. There was a glimmer of something in those purple eyes, something that gave him hope. Tomorrow, he whispered. Tomorrow, we show them the truth. The following day, the demonstration room was quiet except for the hum of computers. James stood before a large display screen, where he would show the council members, station officers, and his assistant, Tom, the footage of Knight solving puzzles. Behind the reinforced glass, Knight sat patiently, its shadowy form calm and composed. What I'm about to show you will change everything we thought we knew, James began, his voice calm but filled with anticipation. He activated the display, showing videos of Knight solving increasingly complex puzzles over the past few weeks. Impressive tricks, Captain Reed commented skeptically. But this doesn't prove anything. James smiled and turned toward the Shadow Stalker. Knight, would you like to tell them yourself? Knight stepped forward, its movements fluid and graceful, and approached the communication panel. It placed its long fingers gently on the controls, and a clear voice filled the room. It was not mechanical, but smooth and deep, resonating with a strange sense of calm. My people were peaceful explorers, Knight said through the speaker system, its voice calm but heavy with history. Several council members jumped in surprise. We traveled the stars long before most of your species reached space. Impossible, one of the Arterian representatives hissed. They are beasts, killers. Let it speak, James said firmly. He nodded encouragingly to Knight. Continue. 200 years ago, we made first contact with the Arterians. Knight continued. We approached in peace, but our appearance caused fear. They attacked without warning. When we defended ourselves, they called us monsters. Others believed their stories. Soon, everyone hunted us. Knight touched the display controls, and the screen filled with images of a world unlike any the council members had seen before. Beautiful cities, built from living shadow, glowing gardens, and peaceful species playing among the stars. This was our home world, Knight said softly, before the fear turned to hatred. Before the attacks began, James watched the faces of the council members. Some appeared doubtful, others confused. A few even seemed moved by the images. But the questions remained. Would they accept this new truth? Or would they fall back on their old beliefs, unwilling to see the creature for what it truly was? The fate of an entire species hung in the balance. The head counselor's voice broke the silence in the room, and it carried a weight of disbelief. If what you say is true, why have we never heard your side of the story? She asked, her eyes narrowing with skepticism. Knight, the shadow stalker, responded with a soft, almost sorrowful voice. Would you have listened? It asked. Look at your first reaction when I arrived. Immediate calls for execution. No questions asked. Only humans. Knight's glowing purple eyes shifted to James, its gaze intense. Only humans stopped to wonder if there might be more to understand. Tom, who had been standing quietly in the background, stepped forward, his earlier fear forgotten. The intelligence tests we ran, he began, his voice filled with awe. They're off the charts. Knight's species doesn't just match our level of advancement. They might surpass us in some areas. He looked to James, who was already pulling up more data on the display. Images of complex patterns and technological blueprints filled the screen, accompanied by data on the species' scientific capabilities. James pointed at the screen, excitement building in his voice. Their technology is based on principles we're only beginning to understand. The way they manipulate light and shadow, it's not just biological. It's a sophisticated form of science we've never seen before. Knight's voice carried through the room, calm but laden with the burden of centuries of survival. We had to hide, it said. To survive, we became what they feared. When attacked, we fought back. When hunted, we learned to hunt. But it was never what we wanted. The deep sadness in Knight's tone sent a ripple of discomfort through the room. There are others like me, scattered across the galaxy, waiting for a chance to live in peace again. The council fell silent, the weight of Knight's words settling on them. Even Captain Reed, who had been the creature's fiercest adversary, seemed to pause in thought. Finally, it was the head counselor who spoke again. Dr. Walker, she began, her voice stern yet less dismissive than before. You've taken an enormous risk. But, she hesitated, looking at Knight with a new sense of understanding. I believe it was worth taking. However, her tone hardened. This changes nothing. James' eyes flashed as he addressed the council. The Arterian representative said your people will never accept my people. He said, his voice rising with frustration. But that's not true. Humans may be new to the galactic community, but we know something about fear and prejudice. We've made similar mistakes in our own history, and we learned from them. He turned back to Knight, whose shadowy form rippled as it approached the glass. You don't seek revenge, James continued. You want what you've always wanted, peaceful coexistence. A chance to share knowledge. To rebuild. Knight's eyes glowed a little brighter as it moved closer to the glass, its form shifting in subtle ways that James had learned to recognize as emotions. The shadow stalker raised one of its limbs, a gesture that seemed to convey more than just an alien form of communication. It was a request for understanding. We don't want war. We just want to live in peace, Knight said quietly. The head counselor looked at the creature, her expression unreadable for a long moment, before she stood. I move to officially recognize Knight's species as sentient beings, with full diplomatic rights. She paused, her eyes scanning the room for reactions. All in favor? Hands rose slowly around the room. Not everyone agreed, but enough did to sway the decision. When Captain Reed, after what seemed like an eternity of contemplation, raised his hand, it sealed the deal. The head counselor nodded gravely, her expression still tight with the weight of the decision. There will be resistance, she warned. Many will not want to believe this. Many will not accept this. The fear is deep. James turned toward Knight, his gaze intense. Then we'll make them believe, he said firmly. One person at a time if we have to. He looked at the creature's glowing eyes and smiled slightly. "It's time for the shadows to step into the light," Knight's voice responded, quiet but filled with a deep hope. "Together," it said, "we begin again." The moment of peace, however, was short-lived. Just 3 days after the decision was made, the station's alert system blared to life. The sound was sharp and jarring, causing James to jump out of his chair in his lab. A voice crackled over the comm system. Captain Reed's voice, grim and urgent. "Dr. Walker, get to the command center. Now!" James rushed to the command center, where the main screen showed 3 approaching vessels. 2 Arterian battle cruisers and 1 Centurion destroyer. The weapon systems on all 3 ships were active, their targeting systems aimed directly at the station. The tension in the room was palpable. "They're demanding we hand over the Shadow Stalker," Captain Reed said, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "They're calling it a threat to galactic security." The head counselor, who had been standing near the communications panel, turned to Reed, her hands shaking slightly. "They're threatening to declare war on humanity if we don't comply," she said, her voice strained. "They're calling us harborers of a dangerous criminal species." James' heart raced as he took in the full gravity of the situation. "Did you tell them what we've learned?" he asked, already dreading the answer. Tom, who was working at the station's sensors, didn't even look up as he answered. "No." The Arterian commander cut off the transmission as soon as we tried to explain. "They don't want to hear the truth." The station shook with the force of a near miss from the incoming fire. The screens flashed red as warning lights blinked urgently. "We have 10 minutes to comply," Reed announced, his voice as grim as ever. "After that, they say they'll take action." James stood tall, a sense of resolve settling over him. "Let me talk to Knight." He hurried to the lab, where Knight was already standing near the observation window, its dark form more solid and present than ever before. As James entered, Knight turned toward him. "You should let them take me," it said softly. "Your people shouldn't die for my kind's sake." James shook his head firmly. "That's not going to happen." He stepped closer to the window. "But I need to know. You said there were others of your kind out there. Can you contact them?" Knight's glowing purple eyes brightened, but the creature hesitated. "Yes," it said slowly, "but calling them would confirm every fear our enemies have. They would see it as an attack." Knight turned its eyes back to James, its voice filled with uncertainty. "James, if I call them, everything will change." James looked at the creature with determination. "Then maybe that's exactly what we need." He met Knight's gaze firmly. "Not an attack, but a show of strength. Proof that your people aren't hiding because they're guilty, but because they chose peace over conflict." The station rocked with another near miss, and the countdown continued in the background. "We have 5 minutes. Captain Reed's voice came over the speaker. "Dr. Walker, now would be a good time." Knight's fingers flew over the computer terminal, its eyes glowing brighter with every movement. "There are 3 ships of my people within range," it said. Then it paused, looking up at James. "But if I make this call, everything will change." "Things already changed the moment you showed us the truth," James replied. "Make the call." The next 3 minutes felt like an eternity. The station's shields deflected 2 more warning shots, the tension rising as the moment of truth approached. The enemy ships slowly advanced, positioning themselves with deadly precision as if they were preparing for an attack. The tension in the room was palpable, the station's command center humming with the anticipation of what was to come. Then, suddenly, Tom's voice crackled through the speakers, filled with astonishment. "Multiple ships dropping out of light speed. But these readings, they can't be right." James' heart skipped a beat, and he immediately sprinted toward the command center. As he entered, the main screen displayed the impossible. 3 massive ships, their surfaces shifting like liquid shadow, rippling with energy like the very skin of night. These ships were easily twice the size of the Arterian cruisers, their dark forms towering over the enemy vessels. "By the stars," Reed whispered under his breath, eyes wide in disbelief. The new ships took up defensive positions around the station, their massive forms blocking the attacker's path. Though no weapons were charged, Their mere presence caused the Arterian ships to halt in their advance. The atmosphere in the room shifted as the command center fell into a stunned silence. A new transmission came through, and a voice that echoed the cadence of night's deep, smooth tone filled the air. "This is the Twilight Vanguard," the voice said, resonating with a quiet authority. "We speak for the Shadow Stalker people. We come in peace, but we will defend our kind and those who protect them." The room was utterly still as the Arterian ships began to retreat slowly, their engines powering down. Night's people, these ships, had made their move, but James wasn't satisfied yet. He quickly called out, his voice commanding, "Wait! Before you go, show them." At his words, Night's people activated the external lights on their ships. The command center gasped in awe as patterns of light and shadow danced across space. The celestial display was breathtaking, vibrant images of cities, peaceful gardens, and serene landscapes, just as Night had once shown them. For the first time, the Shadow Stalker people were showing their true nature, their peaceful past, and their desire for harmony. "We were never your enemy," the Twilight Vanguard transmitted to all ships in the vicinity. "This is who we are, who we have always been. Look upon our true nature and understand at last." The Arterian commander's voice crackled through the speakers again, but this time it sounded shaky, almost vulnerable. How long have you had these ships near our worlds?" Night's voice responded, calm but unwavering. "Always," it said. "Watching, waiting, hoping that someday someone would see past their fear. Thanks to humanity, that day has come." James stood silently as the light show continued to unfold across the vastness of space. He looked over at Captain Reed and the council members, whose faces, just moments ago, had been filled with uncertainty and fear. Now all he saw was awe, amazed, not frightened. The truth was no longer something to be feared, but something to be embraced. James broke the silence with a quiet observation. "Sometimes," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "the monsters we fear most are just reflections of our own prejudice." The head counselor, who had been standing stoically at the back of the room, nodded slowly, her expression solemn yet resolute. "Send a message to Earth," she said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. Tell them that humanity has made first contact with a remarkable people. And this time we got it right. The events of that day had shifted everything, forever changing the course of galactic relations. But the peace was short-lived. A week later, James sat alone in the station's main archive room, surrounded by holographic displays. He had been sorting through data with Night, who stood beside him, its shadowy form steady and calm as they worked. The station had become the epicenter of a diplomatic storm. News of the Twilight Vanguard's peaceful message and their true intentions had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire, and the reactions had been nothing short of overwhelming. "Look at this one," James said, pulling up an old report from the archive. It was from 40 years ago, detailing first contact protocols, specifically Protocol 80047. In case of encounter with shadow-based life forms, immediate termination authorized without standard diplomatic approach. Night, its dark eyes glowing faintly, took in the data with a quiet sadness. "We were always considered a threat," it murmured almost to itself. Just then, the door slid open, and Tom entered the room, carrying more data crystals in his arms. "I found something worse in the Centurion archives," he said, his voice filled with excitement and frustration. "They actually edited their historical records." James turned to him, a frown crossing his face. "Edited? What do you mean?" Tom inserted the data crystals into the terminal, and the screen displayed the revelation. The original peaceful contact with Night's people was completely erased, Tom explained, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he accessed the files. "They've erased the truth from the records." Night stepped forward, a shadow moving gracefully toward the screen. Its long finger reached out to touch one of the displays, and a star map from an ancient time appeared on the screen. "This was our first colony world," Night said quietly. 5,000 of my people lived there. None survived." A cold chill ran down James's spine as he processed the grim realization. "They weren't just hunting you," he said, the words heavy with the weight of their meaning. This wasn't a conflict. It was systematic extinction. The door opened once again, and Captain Reed stepped in, his face older, more tired than when they had first met. His gaze was hard, weighed down by the burden of what had happened. He handed James a data pad. "Earth Command just sent this," he said, his voice low. "It's classified files from the first days of human space exploration." James glanced at the pad, his brow furrowing as he read. "We were warned about your species, Knight," he said quietly. "We were told you were too dangerous to even attempt communication." Knight's eyes dimmed as it absorbed the information, its voice barely a whisper. "How many?" it asked. "How many of my people died because of these lies?" James scrolled through the files, his hands shaking. "At least 12 major colonies," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "Thousands on each one." He looked up at Knight, his eyes filled with regret and sorrow. "Why didn't your people fight back with full force? Those ships we saw, you could have defended yourselves." Knight's eyes dimmed further, a heavy silence filling the room. "Because we knew that violence would only prove their fears correct," it replied quietly. "We chose to hide, to survive, and to wait for someone who would listen. We had almost lost hope." Just then, Tom called out from his terminal. "Dr. Walker, I found something. Look at this encryption pattern in the Arterian military files." James rushed over, his heart racing. The screen displayed communication logs from 2 centuries ago, the first contact between the Arterians and Knight's people. The decoded message appeared on the screen. "Shadow creatures discovered in Sector 7. Initial scans show advanced technology far beyond our capabilities. Recommendation: immediate preemptive action to prevent potential dominance of their species. Mark all records as defensive response to aggression." The room fell silent, the weight of this new discovery settling over them like a dark cloud. Knight moved closer to the screen, its form rippling with emotion. "They attacked us because we were too advanced," it said, its voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Fear," James said softly. "Fear of being surpassed. Fear of becoming secondary to a more advanced species." Reed, his face pale and drawn, sank heavily into a chair. "All these years," he murmured, "all these deaths, based on a lie." James set to work immediately, copying the files to a secure database. "We need to release this to every species in the galaxy," he said, determination clear in his voice. "We need to show them the truth." Reed sighed heavily, his voice laced with caution. "It won't be that simple," he warned. "The Arterians and others will try to stop us. They've built their reputation on being victims of the deadly shadow stalkers." James clenched his fists, knowing that the battle for the truth was far from over. But he also knew that this was the moment they had to fight for, the moment that could change everything. The truth had been revealed, and now it was time to confront the narrative that had dominated for centuries. The lies that had been woven around Knight's people, the luminary, were beginning to unravel, and James knew this would be the beginning of a new era. "This truth will destroy that narrative," James said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of the conviction he felt deep in his bones. "Good. It needs to be destroyed." Knight moved to the center of the room, its dark form rippling with light and shadow that seemed to shimmer in the air. The patterns it created on the walls were beautiful, filled with emotion and meaning. "My people have carried this burden for too long," it said, its voice steady but tinged with a deep sadness. "We watched our children hide in darkness. Our culture faded to whispers. Our true nature twisted into nightmare stories designed to frighten the young ones." James placed his hand on the cool surface where Knight's shoulder would be, a gesture of solidarity. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "Humanity stands with you now." Tom, who had been working at his terminal, looked up, his eyes wide with both awe and a touch of concern. "The first news broadcasts are going out now," he said. "I'm seeing responses coming in from colonies and stations across the galaxy. People are angry, not at the luminary, but at the deception." James nodded, the weight of what was happening settling on him. "The truth has a way of creating its own light," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "Even in the darkest shadows, It finds its way out. Knight's purple eyes glowed brighter in response, a glimmer of something akin to hope flickering in their depths. Perhaps that is why your people were meant to find us, it said, its voice quiet but meaningful. You understand darkness and light, fear and hope. You have faced your own shadows. Captain Reed, who had been silent up until this point, stood up, a decision clearly made in his mind. I'll contact Earth Command, he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. We'll need their full diplomatic support for what's coming. James nodded, turning back to the displays around them. The screens were filled with evidence of centuries of lies, the systematic erasure of truth. The real first contact between our people starts now, he said. This time we'll make it right. Knight's form seemed to stand taller, its presence growing stronger as it spoke. Then let us step into the light together and show the galaxy what truth looks like. 1 month later, the main hall of Space Station Gamma 7 was filled to capacity. Representatives from Earth and 20 human colonies had gathered to meet the first official delegation of the Luminary, a people once feared and misunderstood, but now ready to embrace the light. The station buzzed with anticipation, its atmosphere alive with a strange blend of awe and excitement. James stood near the front of the hall, watching with a quiet sense of amazement as 3 luminary ships docked with the station. The ships were a marvel in themselves, their surfaces glistening with a dark, shifting energy that mirrored the very essence of the luminary people. Knight stood beside him, its shadowy form rippling with excitement. Hard to believe this is the same station that wanted to execute you 2 months ago, Tom whispered from behind them. The doors to the hall opened, and the luminary delegation entered. Unlike Knight, who had learned to dim its bioluminescence during its years in hiding, these luminary radiated with soft patterns of purple and blue light that rippled across their forms. The effect was breathtaking, beautiful rather than frightening. Their light danced like living art, creating an almost mesmerizing aura in the hall. Welcome to Gamma 7, the head counselor said, stepping forward. Her voice was warm and welcoming. We are honored to host this historic meeting. The leader of the luminary delegation, a being who called herself Dawn, moved to the center of the hall. Her voice, when she spoke, was musical and carried a sense of ancient wisdom. For 200 years we waited in darkness, she began. Today, we step into the light again, thanks to the courage of one human who chose to look past fear. James felt all eyes turn toward him, but Knight spoke before he could. James Walker showed us that not all species would reject us, Knight said, its voice full of gratitude. His trust gave us hope again. Captain Reed, now wearing his formal military uniform, stepped forward with a data pad in his hand. The Earth Coalition has reviewed all evidence of the historical persecution of the luminary people, he said, his voice carrying the weight of official recognition. We formally acknowledge the injustice done to your species and offer our full diplomatic support. Dawn's form brightened at the words, the patterns on her body shifting with an inner light. We accept humanity's friendship, she said, and we offer something in return. She raised her hand, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the hall. The audience gasped as the display began to show intricate technical specifications, blueprints that made the scientists in the room nearly breathless. James's eyes widened as he looked at the data. These are your shadow drag specifications, he said in awe. Faster than light technology. The very technology that made others fear you. Dawn nodded. Yes, she said simply. We offer it freely to humanity, along with other advancements we have developed in hiding. Your people have earned our trust. The Arterian ambassador, who had been watching from the back of the hall, stepped forward, his voice filled with skepticism and disbelief. You would give humans such power after what was done to your people? He asked, his tone sharp. Knight moved closer to James, standing in quiet solidarity. Humans have shown us what we long hoped to find, it said, its voice firm. The ability to overcome fear with understanding. They will use this knowledge wisely. Tom, who had been studying the technical data, suddenly looked up, his eyes wide with excitement. These shadow drag specifications, they could be modified for medical technology. The way they manipulate energy, we could revolutionize healing techniques. Dawn's patterns glowed brighter in response, her voice filled with pride. Yes, she confirmed. Our technology was never meant for war. We were healers, builders, explorers. Now we can be again. The head counselor raised her hands for attention, signaling the next phase of the meeting. Today, she said, her voice steady, we form more than an alliance. We begin a collaboration that will benefit all species who choose to join us. As if on cue, more luminary ships appeared near the station, emerging from shadow space. But instead of causing panic, their arrival brought a sense of excitement. Each ship carried a different design, a unique pattern of light, showcasing the true diversity and beauty of the luminary culture. James, watching the display, smiled softly. Look, he said quietly to Night. Tonight, no one's afraid anymore. Night's purple eyes seemed to soften, a subtle smile flickering across its face. Fear cannot survive in the light of understanding, it said. Your people taught us that. Dawn moved to the center of the hall again, her presence commanding yet serene. Let this station be the first of many shared spaces between our peoples, she said, her voice filled with hope. We will build together, learn together, and grow together. As the Earth representatives stepped forward to formally sign the alliance agreement, the luminary ships outside began a magnificent display of light and shadow, painting the stars with their art. For the first time in centuries, the luminary had stepped into the light, not as monsters, but as a people offering their wisdom, their technology, and their friendship. Captain Reed, standing next to James, watched the display with a quiet sense of pride. You know, he said quietly, when you first brought Night to us, none of us could have imagined how far we'd come. But now, looking at this, maybe it was all worth it. James nodded, his gaze fixed on the magnificent sight before him. Yes, he said. It was. James smiled at Night's words, a faint laugh escaping his lips. Refused to execute Night, he mused, shaking his head. I thought you were going to get us all killed. But Night, standing beside him in the observation deck of Unity Station, simply rippled with light, its glowing patterns shifting as it responded. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards, it said quietly. Indeed, James agreed, his voice soft. And sometimes the darkest shadows can help us find the brightest light. They both turned their attention to the view outside the station's expansive windows. Humanity and the luminary, two species that had once feared each other, were now mingling, sharing stories and knowledge. The unity between them was palpable. The age of fear, which had held sway for so long, was coming to an end. The age of understanding had begun. It had been a year since the historic alliance between humans and the luminary, and the progress was extraordinary. The massive Unity Station, a gleaming testament to their combined technological achievements, now floated at the edge of Earth's solar system. Its crystalline towers glowed with a mesmerizing blend of human and luminary technology, shadowlight energy shimmering against the backdrop of distant stars. Night stood beside James, no longer hiding its natural bioluminescence like it had in the past. It now embraced its light with pride, glowing softly in the darkened observation deck. Beautiful, Night said, almost wistfully. Hard not to be, James replied, his eyes still fixed on the view, especially knowing what we've achieved in just 1 year. Below them, in the station's medical wing, humans and luminary healers worked side by side, utilizing a blend of human medical knowledge and luminary shadow energy technology to cure diseases that had once been thought untreatable. The combined knowledge was working wonders, already saving countless lives. A voice broke through the silence. Dr. Walker, you're needed in the education center. The first class of human and luminary students is about to graduate. James smiled, hearing Tom's voice crackle through the station's comm system. The first joint human luminary educational program had been a resounding success, and now the students were ready to graduate. He made his way to the education center, where he found Captain Reed, now Admiral Reed, already waiting. The Admiral, who had once been one of the most vocal opponents of the luminary, had become one of the strongest supporters of the Alliance. Quite a change from our first meeting with Knight, isn't it? Reed said with a grin, watching as human and luminary students filed into the hall together. James nodded. Indeed, it is. I never imagined we'd come this far. Dawn, the luminary leader, stepped onto the stage, her form glowing with beautiful patterns of light that danced across the walls. Her voice was calm, resonant with the quiet strength of someone who had seen the worst of the universe and had still managed to hold on to hope. When we first revealed ourselves to humanity, she began, we hoped for acceptance. Instead, we found something far more valuable, understanding. The graduating students stood together, humans in their formal uniforms and luminary in their radiant, glowing forms, each one a testament to the shared future they were creating. They had spent the past 3 months learning each other's sciences, cultures, and dreams, forging bonds that transcended the boundaries of their species. A young human student stepped forward with her luminary partner. Together, they activated a holographic display that shimmered with light, revealing their joint thesis. A new form of space travel that combined human rocket technology with luminary shadow drives. The shadows are not something to fear, the human student said with confidence, her voice steady. They're just another form of light we hadn't learned to see yet. James watched the display with pride, feeling a rush of emotion. It was a culmination of everything they had worked for. An understanding that the luminaries' gifts, their unique energy manipulation, were not to be feared, but embraced. He felt Knight's form ripple with emotion beside him. Remember when everyone on the station wanted to execute me? Knight asked, its voice quiet, but there was a soft echo of amusement in it. James chuckled. Hard to forget, he said. But look at us now. There are luminary on every major human station, and human scientists working in luminary cities. It's nothing short of miraculous. As the ceremony concluded, the Centurion ambassador, one of the few who had chosen to embrace change, approached them. The Centurion Council has finally agreed to formally apologize for their role in the historical persecution of your people, she said. They are requesting luminary teachers for their own education centers. Knight stood tall, its glowing form brighter than before. Forgiveness takes courage, it said softly. But change takes even more. After the graduation, James walked with Knight through the station's garden level. A serene space where earth plants grew alongside the glowing, delicate crystal flowers of the luminary. It was a surreal sight, an otherworldly beauty born from the merging of two cultures. Human children played among the bioluminescent plants, no longer afraid of the shadows but fascinated by them, their laughter filling the air. We received another signal today, Knight said, breaking the peaceful silence. More of my people are coming out of hiding. They've been watching humanity's acceptance of us. They want to come home. James gazed out at the stars, his mind racing. How many more are out there? He asked. Many, Knight replied simply. But now they have hope. Every human who smiles at a luminary child, every joint project, every new discovery we make together. Each one shows them that peace is possible. Tom's voice echoed through the comm again. Dr. Walker, the new Shadow Drive medical ships are ready for their first mission. They're waiting for your inspection. James looked at Knight, a sense of purpose settling over him. Ready to save more lives? He asked. Knight's purple eyes glowed brightly. Together, it said, the way it should be. As they walked toward the medical bay, they passed a wall covered in photographs, the history of their alliance. There was James, standing up to the station council, and Knight, revealing its true intelligence. There was the first luminary ships emerging from hiding and human and luminary children learning side by side. James paused in front of the last photo, a faint smile playing at his lips. He said, they still tell stories about the deadly shadow stalkers in some parts of the galaxy. Knight rippled with what James now recognized as laughter. Let them tell new stories now, it said, its voice filled with quiet pride. Stories of how humanity saw light in the darkness, how understanding defeated fear, how friendship changed the galaxy. James nodded, watching more ships dock with Unity Station, human vessels alongside luminary shadow ships, working together as if it had always been this way. The the best stories, he said softly, are the ones that teach us to look past our fears and find something wonderful waiting in the shadows. And as the stars glowed above them, the two species, once separated by fear and darkness, had found their way into the light together.